Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for showing up today. I'm very pleased to introduce my colleague, Dr. Dariush Izadi, who is going to talk to us today about ethnographic approaches to language and social practice. Dariush has a PhD in linguistic anthropology, and he is a scholar of language, culture, and social interaction. His research investigates how people use linguistic, semiotic, and material resources to negotiate identities, perform social actions, and construct meaning across diverse social settings. His work draws on mediated discourse analysis, nexus analysis, linguistic ethnography, and related qualitative methodologies, and he examines the complex interplay between discourse, materiality, power, ideology, and everyday social practices. Dr. Izadi's research has addressed topics including linguistic landscapes, multimodality, identity construction, especially in CALD communities here in Australia, social movements, materiality in discourse, and the role of language in shaping social and cultural life. His publications have appeared in leading international journals, including Social Semiotics, the Journal of Pragmatics, Discourse, Context, and Media, and the Journal of Linguistic Landscape. Dariush, whenever you're ready, you can start. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks very much, Mustafa, for your kind introduction and for the invitation. And thanks everyone for coming along to my presentation. I'm honored to give a talk on ethnographic approaches that I actually used as part of my PhD and for the past nearly about, I think I would say 10 years. I did my PhD on interactions in Persian shops. So the examples that I will be drawing on today are mainly from the interactions between shop owners and then customers. So customers, Iranians, and then Anglo-Australians at the same time. So, I mean, I just used one example to make some of the theoretical frameworks that I use a bit more clear to our audience. And at the end of the talk, please, if you have any questions, so we can have a short chat about those questions. So, where are we going? So, I think it's a good idea to actually give you a sort of a quick map, of the hour. So the central point of my talk here is ethnography is not a it's not a method of data collection, but actually is a way of knowing. So I think that's the key point. So you're an ethnographer, you immerse in a community, and when you immerse in a community, you try to understand what is actually going on from their perspective. So in other words, a way of understanding language in social life. So I mean, the key point here for me as a sociolinguist and linguistic anthropologist is the importance of language in social situations. So from sort of the insider rather than at a distance, like scholars, so quantitative scholars, for example. So they are somehow detached from, if you will, reality. I know there is nothing wrong with quantitative research studies, but I think the preference and the nature of the study will determine what kind of methodology you actually need. Anyway. So the arc of the hour. So I mean, the thing is, first of all, I give you some sort of background about what ethnography is, its origin, and then how ethnographers try to interpret or try to analyze the data that they've collected. So in terms of the thing they usually record and audio and video record, and they try to sort of analyze them. So in this case, we need to look at the term thick description, the difference between thick and then thin description. So who is an emic, who is an etic, and then where reflexivity, so the role of reflexivity in analyzing and collecting data. The next one is why language. So, I mean, the term linguistic ethnography has been around for, I think, since 2007. It's relatively new, but I think it basically looks at two important characteristics, or what they call tenets, so language and the social. So some scholars actually think they are two different or separate, but when we look at it from a sociolinguistic and then ethnographic sort of point of view, we see that they're actually co-constructive. So language tells you what is actually going on in a social setting. So talk, so it should, when we say talk, people might think it's about conversation. It could be written, for example, documents. So formal, informal talk that, for example, taking place in a court, talk at a service encounter, for example, all of them. So it will sort of reveal who we are. So what kind of community sort of we belong to. And then the method itself. So we actually look at some of the analytical tools that we use in order to analyze talk, in order to analyze conversation, for example, or written sort of documents. And specifically, we look at the moment at the time of interactions, for example. And then I'll draw upon one example from my ethnographic work, and we look at a customer, an Anglo-Australian customer, and then a Persian, an Iranian sort of service provider, so owner. And the only thing that this Anglo-Australian customer buys is cigarettes, so tobacco in a way. And that makes it more interesting. So two sort of females talking about this particular cigarette. And the last one, why it is important to us. So I think we need to be very careful at the same time. We are, so me sort of researching my own community. So my positionality plays a very important role. So my positionality in the sense that I am familiar with the community inside, and out. So I think that's a important point. We need to be aware of our positionality. So, to what extent, for example, my positionality influences my analysis. So, that's why we need to be honest. We need to talk about positionality and how this helps. I mean, the term ethnography helps sort of CALD sort of communities. And I hope that I do justice today in terms of, because when we're talking about today within an hour, that's the tip of the iceberg. So there is a lot that I cannot include in today's sort of talk. All right, so the usual contrast. So I think in terms of the quantitative and qualitative research, so quantitative researchers usually break the world into variables and correlations. So because for them, reality is just one thing. So there is only one, let's say, honesty. There is only one way to research the term honesty. So what they usually do, they usually use quantitative research methods such as, survey, and to some extent post-positivism. So usually use interviews as well to understand how honesty is constructed, how honesty is actually valued, and so on. So they try, and then they link it. So they try to find patterns, and these patterns are meaningful to them. So, and they link it to some sort of, categories. All right. So, or they say, and most of the time they rely on causal sort of relations. So, and the research paradigm, they're sort of, so research paradigm, a set of beliefs or assumptions that we researchers, so I mean, that form our research in a way. So their research paradigm is primarily positivism. So the only way to research or to actually find out a particular social phenomenon is through observation. And that's the only one. That's the absolute truth according to positivism. But to some extent, post-positivism will somehow disagree with, they usually say we can observe each and everything. So perhaps we could actually bring in some other research methods, as I said, like interview, to see the other side of the story as well. So this is how they see quantitative. Whereas qualitative researchers, they usually are interested in experience, in people's experience, in social actions, and the idea of space. So you cannot analyze a particular talk without understanding, its surrounding. So the people involved, for example, in an interaction, the space, the layout of a particular, setting, and of obviously the importance of time. I don't want to go into that detail, but I think people like Edward Hall talked about the importance of time um, in different cultures. And I think in the Middle East, for example, time when it comes to time, people are not very punctual because relationship is more important, than the actual being punctual. So qualitative researchers, so they understand how they want to actually they try to understand how people experience, interpret, and act within, and that's the key point, a particular social setting. So, for example, shopping at a Persian shop in Sydney would be different to shopping at Coles, for example. So that's the particularity that they're actually interested in, because this particularity is all about cultural, spatial, and temporal sort of norms. And again, the term norm is a bit problematic. So how do we define norm? Some norm for me would be so different, the norm to sort of uh, our audience here. So their research paradigm, so their assumptions about reality is primarily constructivism. So they usually say that realities are multiple. So the idea of, let's say, going back to that term, honesty, for example. So honesty could be interpreted in so many ways, depending on the participants, depending on the context, depending on the topic, and so many other elements, right? So that's why they say sort of honesty is constructed in interactions. So they usually say that meanings are not in words, meanings are in people. So in collaboration, in interaction with people, honesty is produced, honesty is constructed. And obviously, they usually look at it through different lenses, like criticality, like post-structuralism, which we're not going to actually look at. So that's a very basic understanding of the quantitative and qualitative research. So that's what they call the usual contrast. So what is the argument of today's talk? So to understand how language works in social life, and by the way, when I say the term language, I don't mean grammar, vocabulary, and all that. So by language, I mean language as a social practice. So language gives you a sort of a tool that you can analyze, and it tells you all about who these, the people you're studying, these people are. So their belonging, their ideologies, and so on. So to understand language from that perspective or in social life, so the researcher must enter that life, inhabit it, and then learn to see it from the inside, from the perspectives of those being studied. And this is by great scholar Geertz, and then Hammersley, followed by sort of Geertz idea. So I think what happened? So, I mean, when we look at this sort of argument, there's three things that link this argument sort of together. Number one is the term thick description. From the emic and ethics sort of perspective. So emic is sort of the researcher, and then the participant, and then etic is the researcher. So and then the next one is reflexivity and represent. So we're going to talk about all of them in sort of detail, but this is just a brief sort of representation. So what is going on? So, or grasping what things mean to people. So rather than sort of understanding it from the researcher's sort of perspective. This is the idea of reflexivity. So, and that is a very important sort of sentence that ethnographers usually use. The researcher's hand in the account is ineradicable. So you cannot eradicate the researcher's sort of influence, on sort of this idea on the analysis. And the last one is the relationship between language, identity, space. So the nexus of language, space, and sort of identity. So how talk, materiality. So when you actually, so materiality is in my, for example, ethnographic work in Persian shops, um, people usually talked about items, and these items are imported to Australia. So, Persian food, like even vegetables, preserved sort of food. So the whole idea was about these particular, what they call objects. And these objects link people together. So through, to bring back memories, for example, or the smell of a particular food. I think without understanding these elements, we won't be able to understand the meaning of the term language. Obviously, we talk about them through, we use language to sort of express our feelings, but part of things that link all of these together is the items, is the place, is, the materiality. So, um, the idea of so let me just give you just a sort of a very simple example. We will go back to that in terms of the thick description. So this is Geertz's idea of analyzing sort of talk. So think about the term winking. So when do you actually wink? So well, for example, you use it as a joke, for example, okay? Or maybe sometimes you wanna, so maybe it could be used as somehow reassurance, okay? But if you just say closing your eye, that is according to Geertz, this is called a thin description. It won't tell you much about what is going on. But if you tease out the meaning of the word at that moment, okay, that would be thick description. So a bit deeper understanding of the term winking, for example. So I think in the Australian context, winking is a bit of a, maybe telling a joke, or maybe you're actually uh, making fun. Okay, so these are the terms that we sort of. This is the idea of sort of winking. So and again, in our culture, for example, in the Middle East, in Iran, for example, winking may have some other meanings depending on the context and depending on who's involved, depending on in terms of gender, for example. So gender would be it may have another meaning. That's why particularity, as I mentioned earlier, is sort of played a very important role in that sense. Okay. So, what is ethnography? So, the term ethno, I mean, it consists of two words: ethno meaning people, meaning culture, and then graphy meaning writing. So, literally, writing culture. So, ethnographers usually go out to a social setting and they try to observe people and they write about them. So, um, the idea is that, so I mean, what it is and what it is not. So the first part is what it is. So it is learning about people through immersion, not just merely studying them at distance. So let me just clarify the term immersion. Immersion here is being there as a participant, not a visitor. Okay, you got to be part of the community. So, for example, myself, at some point, I was the shop owner because the shop owner had to go out for a cigarette. So I had to take care of the of the business over there. So that gave me, so within that, let's say 5 minutes, I thought, whoa, I wouldn't make a very good salesperson because it was so hard to take care of the cat. You know, there were so many people, they were in line, they were in the queue, and you had to learn how to work with the till. You know, it gave me an insider sort of perspective. That was immersion was all about. Or some other scholars like Sigrid Sarangi. So I think he's the editor of the Journal of Text and Talk. So he said, in order to understand, and he used Geertz's idea to understand what is going on. So he used a term called thick participation. So instead of thick description, he used thick participation. So to be familiar with how, let's say, the local treat things ordinary. Okay, so for me, for example, that may not be, as an outsider, may not be a something ordinary, but for them, for the participant themselves, something could be ordinary. So let me just give you again, very simple example from the interaction. So I observed an Anglo-Australian, a lady, so she came to the shop and she actually observed an Iranian man buying 10 cans of tomato paste. As soon as she entered, she goes, that is a lot of tomato paste. Okay. So, I mean, for me, I did not pay attention to that because that was part of me. Again, you see, in terms of reflexivity, I was referring to earlier. So for me, that was something normal, something, I didn't find this somehow strange or odd. But to her, it was so odd. It was something strange. So that I questioned that. So as a researcher, as an ethnographer, I said, well, how much is a lot? Why do you usually buy a 10 sort of 10 cans of tomato paste? So that's part of our daily life. So we can't go without tomato paste. Anything you wanna actually make, you add tomato, paste in it. So that's immersion is all about. So to get the basic sort of ideas. So, and then the other one is the artistry of seeing. So I think Walcott calls this way of seeing. Way of seeing is different to sort of observation. I mean, the thing is, the example I just gave, I think it's a way of seeing. So going a bit deeper than just observing what is sort of going on. So questions like, ask what, I mean, those ordinary things mean. So like buying 10 cans of tomato paste, what does that mean? Or question the term, how much is a lot? Okay, to who? How much is a lot? To an Anglo-Australian or to an Iranian person, for example. So that's how we understand the term how much or ordinary things in a way. And then so I think that they usually say that's why it's actually a craft. So it's not a procedure. Ethnography is not a procedure. It's actually a craft. It takes time. So to understand the mechanism, so the everyday sort of interaction. And then, so by spending a lot of time with your participants, so you usually get first-hand experience, first-hand participation. So I mean, obviously you got to spend a lot of time. In my case, I spend nearly about a year, and every week, nearly about 2 to 3 days. And for each time that I spend in the shop, so it took me nearly about 3 to 4 hours. So on different days, for example, on weekends, and that gave me a variety of data, a variety of people, a variety of observations, a variety of participations, and so on. So what it is not. So ethnography is not, as I said, a data collection technique that we add to a particular study. So that's the whole. I think we need to understand that because that's the whole inquiry. Is not actually a data collection method. It's more than that. So, and it's not just a single orthodoxy. Okay, it's not a fixed, what they call a fixed agreed upon, for example, recipe. Because when you talk to ethnographers, they have different understandings of, how much time they should spend in a research sort of site, what kind of methods or what kind of theoretical frameworks they have to use, and even how familiar should you be in order to analyze data. So they may disagree. So that's why there is no single agreed upon recipe or method, for that. It depends on the nature of your study. And that's why, um, so at Atkinson and Hammersley, they got a book on the term on ethnography, and they put it that the tradition is marked by diversity, not consensus. Okay, so I mean, there is a variety of ways that you could literally analyze data or collect even data. So, so I mean, the thing is, what even the term, what does that mean? Well, by the term ethnography has been a bit of an issue when you look at, scholars' idea in this case. So the bottom line here is that ethnography is both a theory and is a methodology at the same time. So methodology is a bit different to method. Methodology is all about our research paradigm. It's about ways of understanding a particular research study. So the interpretive grounding. So um, this is very, uh, I think, one of the key aspects of ethnography. So you collect your data, you talk to your participants, and then at the end of the day, you're the one, I mean, you being the researcher, the ethnographer, who, who start actually writing the stuff. So now, in that sense, you are to some extent detached from reality. You collected your data. It's very um, sort of interesting. So you were part of the community, and now when as soon as you start writing, you're not part of the community anymore. So you're sort of detached from reality, if you will. So now that's why it's very important to use the right tool to interpret what was going on based on your data sort of analysis. So beneath the qualitative and then the quantitative split, according to scholars, sit two philosophical commitments. So number one is the ontology. So what is reality? There's something called, let's say, language. There's something called identity. So this is the ontology, the ontology. So what is reality? And the other one is epistemology. How do we sort of we come to know language? How do we, how we come to know that particular realities? That's epistemology. So in terms of qualitative and ethnography, so qualitative inquiry, including ethnography, is inductive. So you look at phenomena and then you come to you come to a particular theory. So quantitative is the other way around. So quantitative is you have your theoretical frameworks, you got all of your data, uh, not so much of data, but you think about it prior, so before you go to your research site. And that's why it's inductive and it's meaning focused. So the whole idea here is how people interact. So when it comes to the term, let's say the winking, the example that we gave, so what does that mean in different situations? For example, how winking is, the meaning of winking is constructed. So that's why they say reality and experience are socially and historically constructed. And this is the two key terms that I think we need to pay a lot of, we need to pay attention to these two terms when it comes to qualitative and ethnographic research, socially and historically. So the term socially here means shared meanings, and then, ways of categorizing the world. So, in other words, in simple terms, I would say this is known as norms. So, when you enter a social setting, there are some norms, and these norms are somehow known to the insiders. But for an outsider, they might find it a bit tricky. So the example I gave, that's a lot of tomato paste, for example. So, but historically, meaning it's been transferred from one generation to another. So, and this historically, it's hidden. So that requires a bit of sort of elaboration through your analysis. So, for example, and then scholars usually say that it's as I said, it's hidden. But another key point here is that they're established practice. You cannot change them, or it would be actually very difficult to change. So, for example, in terms of classroom interactions, usually students sit, the lecturer stands. So if it would be the other way around, it's a very simple example. It would be the other way around, that would be a bit difficult. This is not how historically, for example, teaching, is all about. So that's the historical bit. So, and then realities, as I said, realities are multiple. So that's why we need to go out and understand it from the participant's point of view. And then from, how they interpret, not how the researcher sort of imposes. I think those who are interested may want to look at Denson and Lincoln sort of textbook, the Sage Handbook of Qualitative Research. So, as I said, the paradigm here is constructive and interpretive. So it's all about the situatedness. So it's all about situated associations of experience. So the thing is, in my, for example, data, it was all about the situatedness. And this situatedness is very important because it talks about what is going on at the time of interaction and how it is related to the culture, the bigger picture in a way, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So there's two things. So we analyze things at the time of speaking, at the time of data collection, okay, and then how this analysis links to the bigger picture, which is explanation. How can we explain things to the outsider that this particular Iranian shop so does things differently. So it's not just about, rather than sort of seeking variables or correlations. So they look at people's, as I said, experience and associations and so on. So next, sorry. So, I mean, I've already mentioned the term situated practice that places researcher in natural settings. So you are part of the research. So the aim, as I said here, is holistic, is to understand the whole sort of mechanism, if you will, the politics of the place. Okay, and from they usually say the inside out, from the participant's point of view to the outside world. I should be conscious of the time because there is a lot. So why ethnography? So the rationale. So basically, it's very, very sort of valuable, useful for when you don't know a particular context, a situation, and the goal here to understand meaning rather than variables. And then, so the thing here is, it's sort of it gives us rich data or rich descriptive detail in terms, and accuracy, what is actually going on. And the key term here is low reactivity. So think about researchers interviewing. I mean, a lot of ethnographers are not interested in interviews because they usually think that interviews, not often, but most of the time, the participants try to please the researcher. Okay, so that is the idea of low reactivity. So if the participants, notice that they're being observed, they may behave differently. But when it comes to ethnography, I mean, again, research has shown that maybe the first few hours they may act differently, and you may want to ignore those sort of types of the data that you collected. But the rest, again, I mean, in my case as well. So the rest, I think that would be sort of, if you will, authentic or sort of valuable. So that's, I think it's a good idea. So in terms of low reactivity. So when research done in a particular lab, for example, it's the reactivity is really high. And then obviously it is so the problem here is one of the weak, I would say the criticism of ethnography is you cannot actually, I mean, in my case, I could not, uh, you know, I could not actually observe all of the Persian shops here in Sydney. I could not literally do that. So I had to limit myself to at least two or three shops. So making generalization is one of the biggest problems, but it will give you enough idea, enough information, enough sort of insights that you can, to some extent, you can, generalize. So the origin, I'm sure you're all familiar with Malinowski. So I think he is believed to be the founder of the field. So he went to Papua New Guinea and then he spent, I think, nearly about 20 years doing research. So by attending ceremonies, funerals, and one very important thing was he started actually going fishing with the locals. And what he found was, so he understood the language. So sort of between the locals, he tried to actually learn the language. But there was something, he did not understand the intention of words and phrases that the locals were actually saying. So that's why he came up with these two sort of frameworks: context of situation, the context that you're in at the time of speaking, and then context of culture. How can we link them to the sort of bigger picture? So, and then the next one is there's two things. So the thing is, ethnography has always sat between two sort of ideas. So one is scientific. Okay, so in this case, it's systematic, rigorous. So you have to have clear understanding of your research questions and then your tools. And the other part is the humanistic. So this is where a lot of scholars usually disagree. So this is the sort of interpretive. I mean, the thing here is the close, contextual, focused on what things mean to participants. So that's the humanistic sort of part. And Atkinson and Hammersley usually make this key point. There is never an orthodoxy, so only successive oppositions. So that's the sort of a key point. So you cannot just say, let's do ethnography this time scientifically and the others part, humanistically. No, it doesn't work that way. And then the interpretive turn, which I will return, I mean, later as well. So Geertz sort of changed the whole sort of framework that we think about the term sort of culture. One thing that I think I have to mention is I don't know if you know Rodney Jones. Rodney Jones got a paper, I think, back in 2013, if I'm not mistaken. He used the title of the paper is Culture as a Noun. So when it comes, sorry, culture as a verb. So when he says, when he argues that most research when it comes to intercultural communication is most research is about culture A does this while culture B does that. So for them, it's very, so this is somehow what noun is all about. It's very abstract. It's somehow There is no fluidity in here. But when it comes to verb is all about action. So when you see people in action, that's what he meant by the term culture as a verb. So when you see people in action, so this is how things will emerge, according to Rodney Jones. So this is what following Geertz. So the older view um, treated culture as a force. So something, there's something out there that shaped how we behave in a particular social setting. But Geertz actually says, no, that's not the whole point. So it's, almost like a quantitative research. It's like a cause. I said this because of my culture. So that might not be, according to Geertz, that might not be the case. So for him, culture is like a context, things that are happening in a particular setting, full of meaning. Okay, it's full of meaning. That's in a particular context, and our job is to read, not just put, not just force, but to actually read what is going on, interpret it, and what he calls webs of significance. I think this is one of the key points of his idea of rhetorical turn. So we need to bring that reflexivity to the analysis. So it's not measuring things. It's all about explaining things the way the participants see or from their point of view. I think the rhetorical turn, which I will come sort of later, um, add a very important point here. So ethnography, rhetorical turn is ethnography itself is a written text. So when you look at the ethnographic, for example, studies, it's actually a written text. So, but it's crafted. So, because it is shaped by scholars' voices, ethnographers' voices, so about what to include. And think about it, sometimes we collect data, but we can't analyze all of the data. So we are very selective about what to analyze, what to actually choose in terms of to be our sort of argument, to be our evidence. So that's why I think this rhetorical turn is so important, according to Geertz. So, um, oh, sorry. So that's going back to the term thick description. So culture is not, again, I think I might have mentioned it very sort of briefly. Culture is not a cause sitting there and then we go and we sort of, sort of interpret it. Culture is, according to Geertz, it's all about social events, behaviors, institutions, ideologies, that can be causally attributed. It is not. It is, according to him, it's actually a context, something within which they can be intelligibly, that is, thickly described. So according to him, intelligibly means thickly. So the example of winking, for example. Okay. So so here we need to bring in two important elements. I think we've already mentioned it. So emic, the from the insider's point of view, and then the etic is the outsider, so the researcher's point of view. So a combination of these two, so will provide hopefully some valuable sort of research. And I think I've already mentioned the importance of reflexivity. So we need to be aware of of our influence, researchers' influence in sort of you know, addressing the issues, in analyzing sort of our data. So the craft of fieldwork, and I think this is one of the key points and one of the challenging, I would say, things when it comes to doing ethnographic work. So negotiation entry. Prior to my research, I had been a regular customer to the shops where I collected my data. So I approached nearly about 6 to 7 shop owners, and only 2 of them agreed. So if it weren't, if it hadn't been to my prior sort of exposure, so I would not have been able to even do my research on Persian shops. So that I think that's negotiation entry is very, very important. And we need to be very careful here that negotiation, we cannot observe every single person. We need to be aware based on the research, because of the nature of your work or your research questions, you have to have some key informants. So in my case, for example, uh, with the help of the shop owners, I try to understand who sort of find out who the regular customers were. So I try to approach them. And then some Anglo-Australians, they were actually some regular customers at the same time. So um, the very first, I would say, week, it was chaotic for me. So things were happening. I mean, I was a regular customer there, right? Things were happening so fast that I could not, sort of keep up. So I did not know, should I sort of record now? Should I talk to the customer, for example, now or later? Am I allowed to? That kind of things. It was very, very sort of, it was too messy, if you will. Um, so, and then after a while, I tried to actually understand. So the more I spent time in the shop, and then the more I started talking to the shop owner, the more comfortable I sort of felt. So, and I started analyzing and I started observing, people, and that's what um, the Bernard actually said, the engine of the method. So, sort of participant observation, and as I said, we need to be aware of some of the key informants, not all of them. And there's two types of participation. So, one is passive, and the other one is complete participation. Passive is you're just standing there trying to observe what is going on. But when it comes to complete participation, I think, for example, if they're talking about a particular topic and you're interested, you may want to sort of, get involved and, you know, uh, maybe, but again, we have to be very, very careful because so we don't want to influence, the participants in a way. I remember, so in terms of the complete participation, they were talking about, let's say, the Iranian regime, for example. I tried not to get involved. It was a very sort of a toxic uh, sort of conversation. I did not want to get involved. So I think this is, we need to sort of be aware when to intervene, when to sort of not to get involved. And that again depends on the nature of your research. So, I mean, we have to, as I said, we need to keep a professional sort of distance. And I think Fetterman's quotation here is very, very important. Participant observation combines participation in the lives of the people under study with the maintenance of a professional distance. I think that's the key point that allows adequate observation and recording of data. So the problem of context, I think I may have mentioned it in the past. I mean, previously. So there's two things. So we're analyzing interactions at the time of speaking. But if we actually look at it and we do not look at that from a sort of a bigger perspective, we're missing the point. So that's the idea of micro and macro. Now, if you're familiar with conversation analysis, so conversation analysis is all about what you record. So you cannot bring theoretical frameworks from outside. So what is exactly going on in that conversation? So that's the whole idea of conversation. So they're very, very micro. So if you're talking about, let's say, if let's say people at the counter in the Persian shop, if they code switch, okay, so you cannot say that because they're migrants. So according to conversation analysts. So if they are referring to it, only then can you mention the term, immigrants. Otherwise, So this is the micro, but macro. But I think Hammersley is one of those scholars who actually says something, and the next paragraph he actually contradicts himself. So he says, so if we bring, from out theoretical frameworks from outside and insert it into the text, so what we're doing, he calls this can be considered as an act of symbolic violence. Symbolic is not here, I mean, violence not physically, but we're inserting, we're imposing, we're forcing theories from our perspective. That's what he calls symbolic violence. So, but the thing is, without paying much attention to the bigger picture, we're missing the point. So scholars, usually discourse analysts and ethnographers, bring in, key points like history, like globalization, and they say that a combination of these two, macro and micro, will, you know, um, get us a better understanding of what is going on. So I've got Mustafa, how am I going with the time? It's I think I've got another 20
It's
minutes.
okay. You can keep talking until 10:15
Oh yeah,
maximum.
okay. Okay, 10, 15 would be good. Yeah, okay. Sure. So I try to just wrap it up within 15 minutes though. So as I said, there has been a sort of a relatively new methodology in sociolinguistics and linguistic anthropology, and this is known as the linguistic ethnography. Um, and this linguistic ethnography, I think they followed, obviously they borrowed from anthropology and the idea of ethnography, and they want to see, so they usually use linguistic and ethnographic methodologies to study language use across social settings. For example, doctor-patient interactions, and then they've got court. So what's going on in courts? In my case, shops, in education, for example. So it works in two directions at the same time. So one is tying ethnography down. You actually go and you're very micro. You see exactly what is going on in a social setting, but at the same time, what they call opening linguistics up. So you look at the talk. Okay, so you look at the talk, and these talk, you analyze the talk. So, for example, pause or staring at someone. So non-verbal sort of elements are, play very important role in analyzing. So the thing is, a combination of these two skills again will give us a better understanding of the phenomenon. So the two tenets here, um, I think this is again another key point, and researchers have, I mean, ethnographers have always been struggling or at pains, trying to understand these two sort of tenets. So the idea that you do not assume what a setting means. So we don't assume. We just can't. I mean, the thing is, when you look at some of the some research, they don't even talk about the term context. What is context to them is sort of is not there. It's hidden. It's implied. But linguistic ethnography tries to understand the context. Tries to see what is going on. So, but how? They usually say meaning is far more than just the expression of ideas. So, people's biography, identification, stance, nuance are extensively signaled in the linguistic and textual fine grain. So, and again, line by line, word for word, moment to moment. So, this will give us a better idea of what is going on according to them. So the two tenets, as I said, number one is you work out what is going on in a setting by being there, by observing. but rather than guessing or assuming a sort of a context. So from whose? From the participant's perspective, ethnographically. So number two is the small details of talk, as I sort of mentioned. So a pause, a hedge, a shift in tone, a choice of word, for example, or signal who someone is, where they stand, how they relate to the person they're talking to. And I think that is the idea of transcription. So conversation analysts usually say that the transcription itself is some sort of data because the codes that we usually use, the pause, and so on. So um, the case I'm thinking of here is um, Gumper's sort of idea. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Gumper's. So he sort of founded the interactional sociolinguistics. So I think this is very important here because we cannot assume the context, and then we need to look at the fine grain sort of talk. So he went to observe. At an airport in the UK. So the interactions between Indian and Pakistani staff, so working at the coffee shop, and then the sort of the pilots, and then the flight attendants. So he looked at their interactions. So the flight attendants, and then they were all English. So they speak sort of British English. And then they said that the staff at the airport, so the waiters and the waitresses, so they were actually rude. So he looked at the interactions, and then so when the pilots were ordering, okay, so they were ordering, I don't know, some sort of steak, and then when they ordered, the sort of the waiters and the waitresses said usually gravy. So gravy with a falling intonation. So in English, if you're sort of asking someone, we usually use of a rising intonation in English. But for an Indian, maybe a Pakistani, so that was sort of a falling intonation. And the falling intonation is sort of sounds rude to the eye of an English. And that was the sort of the issue. So and then the bigger picture. What was the bigger picture? The bigger picture was each side sort of said that they were actually rude, they were inconsiderate, they were not polite, and so on, just because of that falling intonation. So that's why the fine grained analysis is very important in that sense. So the next part is language and the social. I think this is another key point. The late Jan Blommert, a great scholar, and he, following other scholars, so he came up with this idea that language is not giving us just information. Language is sort of more than that. Language is what they call language and social are mutually constitutive. So not two boxes wired like together. So Michael Silverstein's another great scholar. He came up with this idea of total linguistic fact. So according to him, so this is the tools that that ethnographers and linguistic ethnographers usually use in order to analyze data. So they say every use of language is at once a form, a situated use, and at the same time an ideology. So a form and a situated use, we're talking about what's going on at the time of speaking, and ideology is the bigger picture. Remember about the macro and micro? So the use and then the form, a situated use, is the micro, and then ideology is the macro. So, and think about that gravy. So gravy, so intonation is the form, situated use, so how you use it, okay, and then the meaning. What does that mean? The meaning is that everybody said that they were rude, so that's the ideology, that's the bigger picture. And then you actually categorize, you actually generalize by saying that all, for example, immigrants are like that. So by just using one particular, uh, intonation. So the implication here is that we need ethnographic explanation. So, and then by asking question like why this form here and now. So again, I think I might have mentioned it, a couple of minutes ago. So the question is, I think, what is language? When we say what is language, language might, it's from a structural point of view. Language is how it should be, for example, communicated. But in terms of language as a social practice, it doesn't matter how language is actually used. So we need to look at this particular talk from the participant sort of point of view. These are some of the vocabulary that used by sort of ethnographers. So the conceptual toolkit. So this is the tools that ethnographers usually use in order to analyze talk. So number one is indexicality. So when we say indexicality, language points to persons, peoples, places, all right, through contextualization cues. I think the gravy example is one example of these contextualization cues that speakers usually use and then listeners usually pick up. So I use, let's say, a falling intonation, and the listener said, well, this is actually rude. You should have used, for example, a rising intonation. This is the cues that we usually use. I don't have much time because I've got an example to go into that detail. The other one is the term genre. So when it comes to the term genre, so we know that how when we go to a court, so how to greet. So there is a very strict turn-taking system. So you're not allowed to talk unless it's your turn. And questions that are usually asked, most of the time they're yes/no questions because they want to go to the point straight away. And there are some elaboration or what they call reformulation. You said a minute ago, for example. So that's why I think these are the techniques that scholars usually use to understand sort of reality or meaning. So, and then this is very important in textualization. So in textualization is you take out an original, let's say, word, phrase, or maybe something from its original context, and you transfer it to a totally new context. So as soon as you transfer it to a totally new context, you change the whole meaning in that sense. And that's why quite oftentimes we tend to, for example, think about tweeting. So you see a tweet, okay, on these days they usually say X, all right, and then you like it, then you retweet it, okay? So you take it from its original context, you actually transfer it to a totally new context. As soon as you do that, you change the meaning because you have different audience. And different audience might interpret, that particular thing differently depending on their familiarity and culture. I think I have to skip that, Mustafa, if that's okay, because I don't have much time. I think this is a very important theory. That's nexus analysis, looking at social action. So not looking at language, not looking at text. So they look at what participants usually do. So let me just very briefly go to the very last point, and that is the interaction. So this is where I collected my data, that Persian shop. And unfortunately, the owner closed the shop closed down the business for about a month ago. So this is the entrance, and that is where most of the interactions were taking place. So people usually come here, which I call backstage. So they would say something here that they wouldn't say at the counter. This is very expensive, don't buy it. We have something in Kohl's nearby, stuff like that. Very interesting. This is another layer. You see, ethnography will give you some sort of insights from that point of view. So, and this is, we all know, I've never smoked shisha, but some, and this is the kind of tobacco that the customer was looking for. Okay, so I'll explain a bit more. So the customer, the C is the customer. Uh, at the time of about that, that was back in 2013. So the customer was an Anglo-Australian, had a child at the age of 3 at the time, and then she was in her late 20s, so maybe 30, early 30s. And the shop owner is the wife. So it said, I said here, shop owner, worker, and wife. So you see, this is just middle of a conversation. It's not just the whole conversation, but what if I give you this card rather? So these are the fine grain analysis conversation analysts usually do. It's my husband's. Sees the smoke on this card bill. Ha ha ha. So he doesn't like me smoking. It's a credit, and then this is sort of when you interrupt someone. Okay, it's a credit, yeah, and signatures back in 2013. So you would actually sign. You could actually sign, but these days you can't. So sign, signature, or pen, or yeah, sign. He says I smoke too much. So looking down, that's 2 seconds for conversation analysts. These 2 seconds is too long. Okay, so you have to actually, you see, what was important to me in this analysis. So there's a number of things that I want to talk about, but I don't have much time to go into detail. But number one is the importance of objects in our daily life. So think about the term card, credit card. So credit card here, the husband is sort of represented by the credit card, as if the husband was there at the time of speaking. He was not there, but the credit card, right, actually carries all of the weight, that the presence, because the husband doesn't like her to smoke. Okay, so that's very important thing. Number two, which is I think more important here, is how the shop owner reacts. The shop owner, twice the customer says he doesn't like me smoking, and then he says I smoke too much. The shop owner doesn't say a word. Okay, so that's we need to question that. So as I said, in terms of reflexivity, after the conversation, after the customer left, and by the way, the shop owner wife, she smokes herself. She smokes herself, but she was at the time was in her late 50s. And then she goes, well, and I said, well, I mean, I saw her smoking, and I said, well, you smoke. What about her? And she goes, well, she's got a kid, and she's young. And then you see, in our culture, women, when I mean Persian culture, Iranian culture, so when women, smoke, everything sort of, so you actually see them differently, see women sort of differently. So when they smoke, so that's from a cultural sort of point of view. But again, the bigger picture here is how gender is actually constructed here. So if there were one man, so if the customer here was a male and they were buying shisha, all right? So I think the conversation, I think we wouldn't have talked about, the importance of, the cigarettes, for example, why women sort of, smoke cigar. So again, I'm not going to go into that detail. That's the whole idea of sort of ethnography. So you try to understand what is going on. You talk to the shop, to your participants, the key informants, and they will provide you with, key sort of ideas. Again, I don't have much time to go through all of the slides, unfortunately, but one very important thing, how does this research, ethnography help us understand CALD, so communities a bit better. So, for example, navigating the system. So we want to sort of watch how people actually get through a clinic, a Centrelink, for example, or a court. So instead of assuming it, from a form, and that was the idea, that we don't assume context, we try to find it. And in there, you want to see that especially when it comes to people whose first language is not English here, I think that would be another layer. And then the role of the interpreter, or I think that would, in a way, play a very important role there. The next one would be accessing translated information. So a translation can be accurate on the page, but when it comes to, real life, it would be different. I think that would be a good idea to see what is going on, or what the document does for a real reader. So quite oftentimes, I think Mustafa, I'm pretty sure he's got a lot of examples in this case. So reading sort of preferences. For example, we say that the community prefers X, but we want to see them in real action, in real encounters. Do they really say that? Do they really do it? They say something, but they may do something differently. And then the interpreted moment, for example, what does a gaze, for example, mean, at a particular sort of time? What does code switching? These days they usually say translanguaging. They don't use code switching anymore in sociolinguistics, but do they carry meaning, for example? What do they mean at that particular moment? Well, thanks very much. Really appreciate it. And then I just close the sort of talk by, again, a great scholar, Ager. Ethnography is encountering alien worlds and making sense of them from the inside out. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dariush. That was very interesting, and thank you very
Thank you.
much for making the link between your own research and the community translation towards the end of the presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
The floor is open for questions, comments, examples, anything you like, provided it's related to the topic. Any questions or comments? Thank you. It was very informative.
Thanks,
Yes,
Geertz.
Dina?
Good morning. Thank you both for a very rich presentation for a Wednesday morning. I was wondering, Dariush, if on that comment where you said you were observing someone, and an Anglo descent lady was thought after observing someone buying tomato paste, she said that's a lot. Do you feel that's also a cultural thing, or is it necessarily like, did that feel foreign to you as well, observing, or is there like a sort of tainted view because you're all from a Persian sort of background?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think as I said the very first time when I saw that, I mean, I didn't pay attention to to the customer. For me, that was somehow normal. So this is how we do it. The moment you say how we do it, obviously it's a cultural thing. You see, as I mentioned earlier, that culture is a verb. We see people, in action. So as soon as you see people in action doing certain things, so that will lead you to sort of an understanding of how that culture works. But as soon as the Anglo question that, and this is what, again, Ager says, the aha moment, that is the important part. That is, I would say, I have to actually observe more of these type of interactions. And that part, I mean, that observation became an important part of my whole research. I would say, yes, that's part of our culture. And I have a I think I've got a paper on that as well. So, and the shop owner actually said, uh, in response to the shop, to the Anglo-Australian, the lady said that, well, listen, this is who we are. She goes, the shop owner said, in Iran, people usually do two things. One, they pay money, even if it's expensive, for tea, okay, and then for tomato paste. They usually use it in rice, in, I don't know, in whatever they do. So it's a cultural thing as well.
Do you think as interpreters, perhaps this is maybe not totally your field, but I'm just wondering for interpreters and our colleagues here on the line as well, do you feel as interpreters we're also somewhat tainted by our own culture when we are interpreting for someone, speaking the language, but not necessarily the same culture?
Uh, well, as I, well, I mean, I don't want to, because I'm not an expert in this area, but I think like ethnography is a I mean, I would say translating experience, people's experience, and then making those experiences sort of understandable for the outside world. Okay, I think to some extent translation and then or interpreting and then ethnography may have a lot in common. Yes, from an ethnographic perspective, yes, I think my I think at the same time it's not a weak sort of point. It helps you understand but not, you cannot, as I said, an act of symbolic violence. You cannot impose your idea, okay, but you have to actually see the things from your participants point of view. But one thing which I forgot to mention, while shop or customers were buying things, okay, so in terms of interviewing them while they were buying, this is called sociological interviews. So instead of actually interviewing them one-on-one, in a sort of a different context, while they were buying, I would say, oh, you buy a lot of, for example, I don't know, chips. There's some chips, at Kohl's you can go and buy them, and they usually say because of the smell of this particular food, because the smell, it gives me a sort of a Persianness. So that's part of the things that we usually do. I think yes, I would say to some extent we may bring in our analysis to to the picture. And I think Mustafa can correct me in terms of translation and interpreting.
Well, in relation to community translation, Dariush, while you were talking about ethnography in general and what it offers in terms of possibilities and approaches for researchers, I was thinking about what could be done by community translation researchers. And some of this you have already mentioned it in the last slide or the one before last. So one thing we could do, and I know that myself and other colleagues have done a lot of interviews, have done focus group, studies based on focus group discussions and surveys. What could complement this is ethnographic research through immersion, as you mentioned, through
Mm,
involvement, through daily observation of actual CALT community
mm,
members and how they navigate systems and how they access and use translated materials. But one concern I have is the time constraints. I mean,
mm,
an individual, a community member would be engaging with texts throughout the day, especially if it's a community member who has very limited English proficiency. They would be accessing information through radio, for example, through the internet, through leaflets they might come across in their daily interactions, in their daily business, in their community interactions, and so on. So they have plenty of sources of information, and they have 24 hours to
mm,
to access different translations and different information depending on what they're doing during the day. So, well, I guess it would be quite challenging
mm,
for a researcher to keep observing. They would need to be selective and focus only on key moments, let's say, in
mm,
a CALD community members' day.
mm. Yeah, makes sense. Definitely. I mean, time has always been an issue when it comes to ethnographic studies. Um, you can't do it just 1, 2, 3 days. It has to be an extended period of time. Perhaps, it depends again on the nature of the study.
And by the way, in research on translation studies and community translation in particular, we make a lot of assumptions.
Okay. Yeah.
We claim things about the communities we serve or we study, and we think that we know them.
Hmm.
We make assumptions about their preferences. We make assumptions about what register or style would be appropriate to them based on what we know about the
Hmm.
language in general and about sociolinguistic facts relating to that language or to that community. But of course, it makes sense to engage with community members and find out whether our assumptions are correct or not.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. I think Sandra Hale may have done some studies on, I mean, using ethnographic methods um, in
She
courts, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay. Okay.
she has published widely on court discourse or court interpreting.
Mm.
Uh,
Um,
I see Mao would like to say
yeah.
something here. Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really insightful.
Thank you.
And as Mustafa said, it would be very useful to whether we can do that frequently or not, but it will be a very useful tool for the community translation or interpreting research as well, particularly for the purpose of constructing target readers.
Mm.
As Mustafa said as well, like we do make a lot of assumptions while critiquing that power imbalance and power issues in relation to power imbalance among the public service providers, readers, as well as the translators as well.
Mm.
So it would be very useful and also like ethical way of approaching the community translation as well. And my question is a little bit silly. First, I came in a little bit late, so probably I missed it, but I'm interested to see what your research question was for conducting that ethnographic research in the grocery store for that study. And the second one is, as you said, you have kind of mixed standing point. You're immersed in, I assume, you have rich understanding and first person understanding of Iranian culture, as well as you're immersed in the Australian society as well. So like, how did you navigate your positionality between those two parties or two spaces? Thank you.
Thanks very much. So two very important questions. So the first one is, so I just wanted to understand how Iranianness, or some said Persianness, got constructed in Persian shops. The idea that some sort of, you know, prefer to use Persian, some Iranian. And the importance of another question is what these linguistic practices in a way, lead to the bigger picture. So, in terms of the diaspora here in Australia. The second question was the importance of objects in our everyday life. So, especially most of the interactions in the shop were based on an item. So, for example, I didn't have much time to talk about the importance of fruit dates, for example. When do we use fruit dates? So that was part of the interaction. So, in terms of the shop owner usually would get a call from, let's say, a customer, and then the customer would ask him to open a box of dates and put it on the counter because they recently lost their parent, or maybe a parent, or maybe a relative, and then they would say that I would come in and then pay later. So the importance of culture, the object as a very important part. The second question Your second question about positionality, yeah, this is I'm still struggling. So after, let's say, 10, 12 years working in this sort of area. So one thing that they usually use, ethnographers, is retrospective. So they usually watch a particular recorded, recorded talk, and they usually go back to the shop, and they usually ask the customer, sorry, the shop owner, you said this, okay? This is my understanding, okay? What do you think? So I had to do a number of times, of this. So that, to some extent, eliminated biases in my analysis, but not all, not all. I would say, yeah, I agree, not all of them. The second one, as I said, you try to live with your key informants. So you cannot actually observe everyone all the time. So you try to choose, let's say, 10, 15 people, and they are regular customers, and you got to define what the term regular means in a way. So with ethnographic research, it's all about defining your tools. So to getting a sense of a better understanding of the term. Okay, so what do you mean by the term regular? How often do they shop? When they come in, how long do they spend, for example, in the shop? So that, and I especially talk to, and then a combination of them in terms of gender, male, female, for example. And then another thing was that I did not want to look at just Iranians. I just wanted to know, and according to the shop owner, one of the shops, the shop owner said that 50% of his customers were Anglo-Australians. 50%. So half of the thing. So I had to choose some from them. So a combination of these methods, have helped me not to rely on my positionality, my own analysis at times. But I would admit that I may have, sort of analyzed some of some of my data based on my own sort of positionality. If this positionality is not actually a hindrance, is not a problem, okay, it would help you better understand some of the tools. For example, the cans of tomato paste. I don't know if you were there when I said tomato paste, for example, right? So those tomato, I did not pay attention to them. So again, part of my positionality, right? And since, as soon as I heard that, I opened my ears, I opened my eyes, and I said, well, listen, I have to listen and I have to see a bit more. Did I answer your questions?
Yes, great. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. No
Yeah,
problem.
fascinating.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dariush, once more, and thank you everyone
No
for
problem.
participating. Thank you.
No problem, Mustafa. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Okay, have a good one.
Soon.
Yeah, bye.